Sooner or later, if you've been long enough on this journey, you're going to be infected with an STD, which in the context of this video is a tongue-in-cheek way of saying a spiritually transmitted disease. So what is a spiritually transmitted disease? As I'll be exploring in this video, a spiritually transmitted disease is an illness of the ego that can spread across entire groups of people. We're all vulnerable to it. None of us are immune, because these types of illnesses are invisible to the ego, no matter how much inner work you've done. Spiritual development is a slow process and gradual journey of unfoldment that we experience over a whole lifetime, and some people say many lifetimes. So a lot can happen during this time. Just like in everyday life, where we can get sick or infected with a disease without even realizing it, a spiritually transmitted disease can infect the ego in such a subtle way that we can go years and sometimes decades without even noticing. In this video, I'm going to be exploring 5 of the most common STDs you can catch. So first of all, how do we catch these spiritually transmitted diseases? The most important thing to realize about STDs is that they overtake us in a very subtle way, where the ego begins trying to claim ownership of some spiritual desire or breakthrough or identity as its own. This blending of the ego with a genuine spiritual desire or insight is so subtle that it's very easy to go unnoticed for a long time. The first is what I call McSpirituality, which is a reflection of our age of instant gratification, where the ego craves a quick consciousness upgrade or some form of instant enlightenment as a way to feel special or elevated without having to do the hard work. I've seen this in some of the psychedelic culture and some workshops that claim to be enlightenment intensives, whatever that means. But the reality is that spiritual transformation can't be turned into quick instant coffee. It can happen quickly, yes, but more often than not, it's a slow process of change, growth, and evolution. The second STD is confused objectives. Many of us aren't very clear as to what our motives are for seeking spiritual growth. Most of us genuinely want to grow, but it's easy to mix our motives as to why we're pursuing spiritual transformation, like for example, the desire to feel special, or manifest abundance, or develop esoteric powers like the ability to see auras or communicate with the dead. We can save ourselves a lot of time and frustration by getting clear on what we want from the spiritual path and what we're willing to let go to get there. Many times we think we want one thing, but we're looking in the wrong place. One common example is thinking that you need a spiritual awakening, when in reality what you really need is to heal old wounds and traumas that are causing you suffering. The third STD is spiritual imitation. This one's gained more popularity now that we live in a visual age, and it's the idea of dressing, talking, or acting the way a supposedly spiritual person would as a way to gain social status or respect. But imitating what spirituality is supposedly meant to look like on the outside alone isn't a replacement for actually doing the internal spiritual work that it represents. Now, if we're doing both, that's great. But I've often found that the most genuinely spiritual people are often the most unassuming and down-to-earth, who let their actions and their being speak louder than their words. The fourth STD is what we call the spiritually inflated ego. This happens when we have a spiritual or mystical experience of some kind, and the ego begins identifying with these temporary experiences or insights, thinking that we are super special or enlightened for having them. You may have come across someone who makes premature claims about being enlightened, or thinks they're the reincarnation of some ancient teacher. The reality is that being able to access these experiences isn't the same as integrating them. The tricky thing about the spiritual ego is that once someone believes that they have arrived at some elevated, awakened spiritual place, they stop listening to feedback, and in that way they become unreachable. This is probably one of the most tragic spiritually transmitted diseases, because in some way their inner growth stops completely. They start seeing themselves as spiritually superior to others, and it becomes a form of spiritual narcissism. The fifth STD is groupthink. This is a form of spiritual codependence that you can find in some spiritual groups, where there's unwritten rules about how to think or how to behave or how to act. Many of us are familiar now with the many cult scandals that seem to be increasingly popping up. This STD has the effect of homogenizing the entire group, which creates a sense of safety for the members, but it destroys all independence and self-sovereignty. The group then begins rejecting all individuals' attitudes or beliefs that don't agree with the unwritten rules of the group. And it's then that the spiritual abuse starts, by excommunicating or outlawing anyone that doesn't agree with those rules. Many of these spiritual groups can become like surrogate families, providing us with a sense of belonging. This is especially true if we have a wounded inner child that craves acceptance and love. But the danger with this groupthink STD is that it comes at the cost of our own individuality and freedom. Like all diseases, there are many methods of transmission. In this case, I'm going to explore 3 ways that these spiritually transmitted diseases spread. The first is through our ego's internal blind spots. An attack from within is much harder to notice than an external threat because it's way more subtle. And no matter how self-aware you think you are, we're all prone to not seeing ourselves clearly. The second is through exposure to cultural influences. This is especially true in the age of social media, where we're wired to compare ourselves to others and emulate what we think will make us loved and accepted. And the third is through our relationship with a teacher, where we project onto them a sense of godlike power and infallibility, absolving our own responsibility to find truth, freedom, and responsibility within ourselves. Groupthink is especially common among these crowds. The spiritual teacher, Yogananda, once said, "Truth isn't afraid of questions." If we have had any spiritual experience or insight, then we should be open to having it challenged. You might be challenged by a teacher, mentor, or close friend who might give you feedback when they notice that you're sliding into one of these STDs. How you respond to that feedback will be a testament to how much you've evolved, how much you've awakened, how much you've grown on this spiritual path. If you're curious about whether you've fallen into any of the spiritual traps, or want to go deeper into exploring the shadows that are inherent on the spiritual path, check out the popular shadow work journal that I've linked in the description. It has over 60 prompts that will help you deep dive and illuminate your unconscious patterns and blind spots. It's important to note that it's easy to assign judgment to these STDs and use that as an excuse to attack ourselves or reject others who we perceive as infected. But having a spiritual disease doesn't make us or anyone else a bad person, because any of us can easily fall into them. The key here is to be self-aware, honest with ourselves, and humble, knowing that there's dangers in any path, including the spiritual one. That's it for now. If you like this video, let me know in the comments if there's any STDs you think I should have included. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.